just a little before 12:01.
Just in time for the tornado sirens.
Okay, Amy, are you good to go?
I'm good to go.
Okay, thanks. Thanks everybody for joining us on the Department of Agricultural, Environmental and Development and Economics monthly webinar. We really appreciate your attendance, and we're really looking forward to our listening to our seminar speaker or webinar speaker for the day. Today's speaker, Amy Ando, is the department chair and professor in the Department of Agricultural, Environmental and Development Economics. Amy, you've been here for about a year and a half now, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so Amy joined us about a year and a half ago from the University of Illinois, from their Department of Agricultural and Consumer Economics, where she was a professor for many years, 1999 to 2023. Before that, she was at Resources for the Future, and prior to that, got her PhD in economics from MIT. So we're delighted that you're with us today, Amy, to talk about this research you've been working on, urban willingness to pay to protect nearby farmland, nature, and local foods. And as you well know from your time here in Ohio, this is a topic of super interest here, but not just here, pretty much all across the US. So, Amy, welcome and thank you.
Thanks very much, Brent, and thanks to all of you for tuning in live today or for listening to this later on. Um, It is really my pleasure to now be the chair of the Department of AEDE, but it's kind of fun today to take my chair hat off and put my faculty researcher and problem solver hat on. So what I'll be talking to you today about is a little bit of research that I've been doing with co-authors, but kind of set in the context of a lot of policy issues that are going on, as Brent says, in Ohio, but also all across the country. Mm. Oops, there we go. So, the heart of this is a set of challenges. One of those challenges is ongoing conflicts over land use. We only have so much land. Nobody's making more of it unless we actually colonize Mars, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that. Um, and so there's always this question about for a given area of land, what are we going to use it for? And what we've seen over the course of history is that we see shifts in land use pressures because of changes in demographics, either economic, people, populations growing or shrinking, moving around, and also economic changes. So, as economic conditions for residential development are good. People want to develop more. During the recession of 2008, there was really a downturn in pressure for that. We also see, as farmland, as crop prices change, that changes incentives for farmland to grow or to shrink. So it's all very dynamic. Um, but what we've seen, I know that, right, it feels like a new conversation, the concern over lost farmland. But at the end of this talk today, I'll be talking about some research done not by me, but by other people that's really been going on for decades. So concern about lost farmland is something that's been a concern for a long time, and also concern over lost nature. Here we have pictures of a beautiful agricultural landscape, and then on the right we've got an example of a wetland in Ohio. These are all important parts of our landscape, and both of those kinds of land uses are threatened. So that's one challenge. Um, in addition to housing, to farmland and nature, we're worried about those disappearing, but we're also worried about the fact the housing prices have gone up. Um, I don't know if anybody's tried to buy a house recently or rent an apartment. It's expensive, and that's really gone up but we could have a whole other webinar about the things, the whole confluence of factors that went into that. But when housing gets that expensive, people respond by saying, well, we want people to be able to afford to live in a decent place. And so what that creates is demand for more construction, and that can create demand for more land use conversion away from farmland and nature into housing. So that's a challenge around land use. Another challenge that's a little less central to this talk, but I do want to mention it because it's part of the integrated research that we've done, has to do with food insecurity. We're a wealthy country, but food secure insecurity is still really common. Um, so it's about estimated to be about 14% of people in Ohio have some degree of food insecurity. This is a map from the Map the Meal Gap program. It's kind of cool. You can go online and check it out and like drill down into counties and so forth. So this is not just an urban issue. We have food insecurity all over Ohio. Different rates in different places, but it's a factor all over the place. Um, how do we deal with that? Well, one of the big policies that we have to reduce food insecurity is SNAP or food stamps. And there's a whole body of research about that, about how SNAP does reduce food insecurity. However, those food insecurity rates I showed you are with SNAP existing. It's not a total solution to issues of food insecurity. So, one question that comes up from time to time, and increasingly in recent years, is whether promoting local foodways is a way to provide more access to food to more people and maybe reduce some of those food insecurity rates. Okay. So those are the challenges in our department. All of our research is focused on solving challenges. So my goals for us here today are to have a conversation about a couple of things. So we're going to learn a little something, a little bit preliminary. Some of the research is preliminary about the values that people place on farmland and on nature near cities, because most of that conversion of farmland, well, a lot of the conversion of farmland and nature happens near cities, which are growing with that pressure to build more housing and shopping and stuff like that. Another question I want to ask, though, it has to do with food access. So one thing that economists haven't really studied very much at all has to do with how much do people forage. Just go out and get food. There are, I don't know if anybody ever does this. Go out and gather mushrooms or pick berries. I've lived in places where there were websites where people would share locations of places where there were fruits and nuts and things. Fishing is a form of foraging, right? You just go out and you fish and you catch food. That is a way that people can get food. And so, how much are people doing that? And what is the value that people place on being able to access food from nature nearby and also from farms that are near where they live? And then another thing that we'll be talking about a little bit is some evidence about the kind of qualitative trade-offs that people are willing to make. Again, we only have so much land. It can be ag, it can be protected nature, we can have growth. What can we learn from research about the kinds of trade-offs that people are willing to make over these things? Okay. So to start out with, I'm going to ask what seems like a silly question. What are values? Um, you might think, well, what's the value of something? It's its price, right? Well, so what's the value of farmland? Uh, it's easy to say that the value of farmland is, well, you have a farm, you produce dairy, or you grow corn and soy, or you have flowers, or something like that. I just had lunch with somebody who has a farm, and flowers is part of what they do. That's the first product that they sell. Um, and so, one way that we can measure the value of farmland is the market surplus on the products that get produced from that farmland. There's a well-established methodology, and it is not too hard, right? We know the quantity of stuff, we know prices, we can say something about demand and costs, and we can do that. But is that the only value of farmland? Is that the only reason that people worry about farmland loss? I don't think so. Um, that photograph that I showed at the beginning of this talk, it's scenic, right? Farmland is beautiful. And talking to people in Ohio who are worried about this, there's a lifestyle around farming and a sense of place. So even if you're not yourself a farmer, having farmland as part of where you live, that becomes part of your identity. And those things have value. They aren't sold in the market, but people care about them. And so part of what I'm going to talk about later is how we can kind of estimate those values. Now, with nature, nature isn't sold in the marketplace, so we can't do that first thing. There's no market surplus on products produced from nature, really. Um, however, nature produces recreation. I, Webinars are sad because I can't talk to you all in person, but if we could, I would ask you, how many of you ever go hiking or fishing or cross country skiing or hunting, uh, kayaking, whatever, boating? There's a lot of recreational value to nature. It's scenic. People appreciate the scenery of nature around where they live. Um, Nature can also produce some things that economists, because we're heartless, call ecosystem services. Uh, and those are practical things. So nature actually does a lot of very useful things for people. For example, wetlands can filter water. They support wildlife, which we enjoy just because wildlife is cool, but we also, do hunting. Um, so there are a lot of practical values that come from nature, in addition to the more non-use thing, recreation and scenery, or sorry, scenery is non-use. And then finally, just like farmland, nature, uh, if you live in a place that has nature around, that becomes part of your sense of place. Like, oh, there's a forest here, or there's a marsh, and so that also becomes part of your sense of lifestyle and sense of place, and that too has value to people. So, economists, I know everybody thinks that we're all about money, but economists actually spend a lot of time figuring out how to come up with credible estimates of the values that people have that aren't just what gets sold in the market. How do we do that? Right. Again, market values, it's easy. We just look at the difference between consumer value and the cost of production. Um, Use values, things like recreation, we can say, okay, well, somebody traveled this far to go fishing, and that tells us something about their value for fishing. We can also say, well, houses near this protected area or near this farm are higher, and so that gives us some estimate of the amenity value that people get from living near it. um, but not all values that people have are about direct use. So there are also these things that we call non-use values. Um, you know, I may not drive out very often. I kind of live right in the middle of Columbus, but I really value there being farmland, even if I'm not near it. Um, and so to get at these things that are more intangible, we can use surveys about hypothetical scenarios. And I'm going to give you some concrete examples. This research that I'm showing you is this kind of research. We use surveys about what ifs in order to understand what people would be willing to pay to have more of an amenity or to prevent the loss of what they already have. By the way, I do want to encourage people, if something is not clear, feel free to put that in the chat. If you have a question about something, um, go ahead and ask. I don't mind being interrupted, and sometimes it's better to be interrupted now than to wait until the end if you're sitting there being very confused. Okay, so I'm going to start here by giving you a sneak peek of some work that's in progress. So what that means is all of these numbers could change a little bit, but we've been working on this long enough that I'm confident that the basic results are pretty robust. And so this is research about the values of farmland and nature and local food. This is research that I'm doing with some co-authors. Almost all of us end up working with other people. Corey Lang in Rhode Island, Fred Nyanzu at Illinois, and Brian Partham, who's at US EPA. Um, and so this is survey research. What we wanted to do was to understand, in small, medium, big-ish cities in the center and eastern part of the country, how much do people value having farmland and nature and local food in areas right around the city? So we did a survey of people in 10 cities. I'll show you which ones in a moment. And we kind of framed it this way. So you open up, it was an electronic survey. So there's pressure for development, and that means that farmland and nature are threatened. However, public money could be spent on projects to protect natural areas and farms around your city. And we made sure we did this research only in places where that statement is true. um, and we pointed out that protected nature could have new opportunities for local people to fish and gather food like berries to eat. Um, and protected farms could increase the amount of food that they produce for sale locally. Um, just to be clear, what people were thinking about, we told them to assume there would be no hunting in these places, and that they wouldn't be big enough protected areas to affect housing prices. So don't worry about that. Um, just think about whether these kinds of projects would be good. And then would you be willing to pay a certain amount of money for such a project? And the way this kind of research happens is we give them a bunch of different scenarios that vary in the details. So for this particular one, this is an example of a scenario. Um, so there's a certain number of acres of nature that it could have, a certain number of acres of farmland. It might have access, maintained trails, or picnic tables. That's not in this particular example. In this one, there was a certain amount of meals that you could expect to be able to get from nature each week, a certain amount of meals you could be able to buy from a farm stand each week. Um, it specifies how far away it is from where you live and how much you would have to pay each year in taxes in order to make this project happen. Okay, so here I am, I'm taking the survey and I'm shown this and I'm asked, if you were given this option, would you endorse it? Yes or no? And then there would be another question that's sort of a different combination of things. So maybe the next one has more nature but no farmland, or no meals at all, and maybe a different cost. And then again, you're asked, okay, if it was this project, would you endorse that or not? Whoops, my mouse is a little bit too fast. So we ask our people who take the survey, um, about 6 of these questions. And so we can see in the data, we have data on what the characteristics of a project were and whether they said yes or no. And we analyze those data, and what that means is that if a lot of people, it's like, wow, the choices that have a lot of nature are getting said yes to, whereas the ones that have a lot of farmland, people are saying no to. Well, that tells us something about the values that people have. And the fact that there's a cost option that varies, that allows us to back out the actual dollar value that people have for each of these different options. Okay. So I'll tell you a little bit about the results. So just the sample. These are the cities that we looked at. This percent is the percent of our sample, the percent of respondents. So over a quarter of this sample is from Columbus, a bunch from Pittsburgh, but also some other smaller cities too. And we kind of compared our sample to characteristics of the populations in the areas, and we're pretty close. Women tend to answer more surveys than men, but we're not way off. So it's somewhat representative of these areas that are growing and and have issues with protecting nature and farmland. Again, this is not finished research, but what are we learning so far? Very preliminary, so these numbers could change. If you look at these first two lines, the willingness to pay. So the average amount a person in our sample was willing to pay per year to have 100 acres of nature protected was a little over $3. The value of farmland is about the same, actually, maybe slightly lower. Um, so what we're finding is that people are valuing farmland almost as much as nature. And I know that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but there's a lot of people in Columbus. um, and as we move down these results, there are large values for local food. So if we take into account the fact that people would be able to get food from that farmland and meals from nature, that's a fair amount of money added to it. And if we allow for access, maintain trails so that that's a hugely valuable thing. People really like to have recreational access. What does it mean to have recreational access to protected farms or preserved farms? You can think about, I've been to farms that do have picnic tables or they have, walking paths. There are farm businesses, agribusiness, right? And so you definitely could have farms where the deal was, yeah, we're paying you to stay a farm, but allow people to walk around a little bit and look at the cows, look at the crops and enjoy the environment. So having access and food increases the value that people have quite a lot. They prefer projects that are close by to things that are far away. This bottom line, this is sort of a technical thing. People often have a status quo bias, like, I don't know, I don't really like government projects. So that's actually a dislike of projects. But if you add up all the positives, that will end up outweighing the fact that people don't like projects. You can't see it from this table, but in other regressions, in other analyses, we do find that the values that people have for things are really very similar across demographic characteristics, men and women, people in different racial and ethnic groups, um, wealthy and low income people, uh, Republican, Democrat, doesn't really matter. uh, Actually, this is a theme I've been finding. I found I did some research I'm not really going to talk about today, but about people's willingness to pay to improve water quality in rivers in Illinois. And there was no difference between rural and urban people. Everybody appreciated the the sort of quality of rivers in their area. They wanted to not have harmful algal blooms. And people were people. There weren't big differences among groups in those preferences. All right. Whoops. So let me go back just for a second. People were expressing as much interest in getting food from nature as they were in getting food from a farm stand. That is surprising. We weren't really expecting that. And these are people in the city. We aren't surveying people, out in rural areas. And so, really? So are city people actually getting food from nature? Is that a thing? Fortunately, we did ask some questions in this survey that were just descriptive. And just to give you an example, we asked people, where do they get their food from? Um, and so these here are the percentages. So how many people get food from large grocery stores? Well, lots of people. Um, Lots of different options, but I want to call your attention to the bottom of this table. So for this sample of people living in the communities, not out in the rural areas around them, um, 18% reported getting food from fishing sometimes and almost 5% often. Um, 10% reported getting food from hunting sometimes and 3 or 4% often. And an astonishing 16% said they sometimes got food from just gathering things like fruits and nuts in public spaces. And 4% of people said they did that often. So this is common, and it's not just, I mean, a lot of research in economics about fishing is about recreation. Like, oh, it's fun. We're going to go fishing and it's fun, and we're going to go hang out with our friends. And but this is telling us that fishing and hunting and foraging are not just about recreation and culture. They are about food and food security. And so I think that this is an underappreciated element of how people get food and something that we're going to be interested in studying more in the future. Okay. So that's as far as we've gotten with this. It's still being analyzed, and I'll have more concrete results from that later. Well, not today, but in the future. Um, I want to talk a little bit now about a different paper. So this is a paper that I wrote with some sociologists and a forester, Paul Gobster, an ecologist, Len Hunt. Um, And so this is a paper all about trade-offs. Uh, so again, as I said at the beginning of today's talk, communities all over the place are struggling with challenges of trade-offs. You can have a community that grows, more people, more economic health, all that kind of thing, lower unemployment. Um, or you can have, protected areas, nature, or you can have ag land. And there are conflicts between these things. For this particular project, this was done with funding from USDA. Actually, the work in progress that I just talked about is also based on funding from USDA. We focused here on two different places. Jasper County is in Iowa. It's not too far from Des Moines. Um, and it has, the little town of Newton is growing. There's a big grassland there in which they are reintroducing bison. Um, I lived for 24 years in Illinois before coming here to Ohio. And in Illinois, there's hardly any of the original grasslands left, maybe 1%. And so there are some efforts, I guess Iowa has some grasslands too. In that whole region, there's some efforts to bring back grasslands and in some places to reintroduce the bison that used to roam. Um, uh, and 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 there's a lot of excitement around that, but bison take up space, and that they're not free. You got to introduce them and manage them and so forth. So there are these questions. How much resources do we want to put? Do we want to expand the grasslands? We could restore more ag land to be grasslands, or more degraded urban land to be grasslands. We could expand the bison herd. We could grow the cities. We could urbanize more. We could have more economic activity. What do these communities want? So Jasper County, that's in Iowa. Will County is right outside of Chicago. And so, in some ways, Will County feels a little bit like the counties just outside of Columbus. Chicago's way up there. See that little star on Lake Michigan? But you know, people in Illinois call it Chicagoland. So there's Chicago, and there's the whole ring of expanding suburbia around it, kind of marching out into agricultural land. And so, just as people worry in Ohio about Columbus and other cities expanding and eating up agricultural land, people in Illinois worry about Chicago expanding and absorbing more agricultural land too. So, what do these communities want to be in the future? So we did another survey again, asking people about choice scenarios. Here, the attributes that we put into the scenarios were residential growth. So population could be growing. Protected grasslands, so we could have no change or more protected grasslands. Bison, so we could have no change or increase the number of bison. Access to recreation. So there are some actual recreation areas, bike trails or parks. Are they far away or are they close by? Agriculture. So how much of the land in the county is used for agricultural production? And unemployment, so a factor in how much people are thriving economically. Do we have 2%, 4%, or 8% unemployment in the future? So this is what a choice question looked like in this survey. And so you could have option A, a shrinking community, no change in grasslands, um, recreation's 20 miles away, ag is 50% of the land, we grew the bison herd, and unemployment's at 4%. Or in this case, there are two different hypothetical future scenarios. Option B, uh, residential growth is growing in this case. Um, we have more protected grassland. Recreation is closer. Maybe they built a new bike path or something. We have more ag land, no change in the bison herd. Unemployment is also 4%. So this is an example of two options that we gave people to choose between. We asked them to think about it and pick whichever one they preferred or tell us, I don't know. I don't really have a preference between those two. And each survey respondent would have a couple of different combinations to choose. Kind of like, when you go to the eye doctor and they hold up two different glasses, it's like, which is clearer, this one or this one? And then they change it again. It's kind of like that. Um, and we gather data on what the options were like and which one they chose. So, what did we learn? Here, there isn't really a project for people to pay for. Sorry, there we go. Um, but we can express, their values for things in terms of how much higher unemployment rate they'd be willing to accept, if to have more of it. So people like agriculture and they like natural grasslands. So if you look at agriculture, which is the bottom of this table, and protected grasslands, in both cases, they're willing to accept slightly more unemployment in order to have more protected grasslands and more land in agriculture. Um, People like to have recreation closer. So access to recreation, that's actually distance. So they don't like distance. They'd prefer to have recreation close by. Um, they also like residential growth, right? So we want it all. We like all of these things. The only thing they don't care about is bison, which is a little bit sad. I feel sad for the bison. They're like, yeah, whatever. It's fine to have them, but we don't really want more bison. There was no significant preference for having more bison. So, what we see is that people are actually willing to give up prosperity to have higher unemployment rates in order to keep agriculture and nature in the landscape. But they still want to have economic growth, they still want to have population growing. Um, I know sometimes, whoops, when I talk to people in Ohio, especially in rural parts of Ohio, there's a lot of like, well, why do we really need growth? I gotta say, I don't know if anybody's ever been to parts of Southern Illinois to like Cairo. Cairo was in the New York Times a while ago, but if you go there, there are some towns that end up in a negative population death spiral. So you lose population, and that means that maybe you no longer have a local school and the local supermarket closes. And then that makes it less nice to live there. And so more people move out. And so in maybe you don't need to have a growing population, but you do have to be careful not to fall into a spiral where you're shrinking and then that shrinking sort of feeds upon itself. And so we see that. We see that, and this was a survey not of officials, but just of regular people in these communities. And they want to keep up some residential growth in addition to protecting the lands that they think of as part of their sense of place. Okay. So that's the original research that I wanted to share with you. But that doesn't answer any questions. And so I'm going to close with just some reflections here, and then perhaps you'll have some questions, or we could even have a conversation. Um, So just to kind of sum up, communities face hard choices over land use. That has always been true. It feels even more true now. Um, what we have as evidence, and the new papers that I've showed you here are just more evidence about this. Even urban people, so not this isn't just a rural thing. Even when we survey people in urban areas, they place a value in keeping agriculture and natural areas in the landscape around them. So that's something that folks really value. Another thing that I think we're learning is that being able to get food from nature is an underappreciated strategy for reducing food insecurity. We still need SNAP, we still need WIC, we still need school lunches, we still need all those other things that we have in place to support people, especially kids, in being food secure so they can thrive. However, it looks like food from nature, supporting more access to that could be another strategy for reducing food insecurity. But I'm going to say that, we want, if we want it all, then that's hard, right? How do we hold on to our agriculture and natural lands while still growing, as we saw people wanted in Will and Jasper County, or keeping housing prices reasonable so that everybody can afford to live? Um, so there's actually a pretty big body of research in economics about this kind of thing, and we could do a whole nother webinar about that sometime. But I'll just give you a little bit of a hint. So there's a lot of research about tools like easements. So an easement is where you don't buy the land from the person, but you buy an easement. You pay them basically for a legal agreement that says that they're going to keep it. They're going to keep it in agriculture. Um, and that way, it's voluntary. The person is doing this themselves, and they're getting paid for giving up the right to sell it to be developed. Um, Another tool that people have used in other places is tradable development rights, um, where you sort of say, uh, we're gonna try to limit the amount of development that happens, but you can buy and sell those rights. You could do upzoning in cities. So those things are limiting growth around the peri-urban areas. Um, Another thing that you can do is to just reduce the pressure for sprawly development. And so if you drive around Columbus, you see a lot of apartment buildings and houses being built within the city boundaries. So that kind of infill development and upzoning, so in places that are already developed, but where you could, remove some low density housing and replace it with housing that can accommodate a larger density of people. Those things can increase the supply of housing in urban areas without adding to the pressure for sprawl. Um, urban development policy is, in fact, agricultural land conservation policy. Um, there is a body of research about this kind of thing, and research indicates that because of the benefits of preserving ag land, like you protect some land and that actually increases the value of housing nearby, which increases the property tax base. And so there is some research that indicates that ag preservation programs can be self-financing. So yeah, maybe you spend some money buying easements, but that can uh, pay for itself by increasing the property taxes that the community brings in, for example. So there is a lot of research about this that we can draw on. Earlier work has been done on policy. Whoops. Sorry, this is I messed up my slides. Good. I did want to mention this, that we need to watch out for leapfrog development. So if we are too restrictive about development right around a big city, the state of Oregon did this. The state of Oregon would have these rules about green belts around cities. And so what you would get is a green belt right around the city, but then development would leap over that and you would end up with a lot of development just on the other side. And that may not be exactly what you want. So you have to be a little bit careful with things that are just stop. If you haven't reduced the pressure for development, then it's going to burst out somewhere. And if you stop it in one place, it's like whack-a-mole, right? You whack it here, but then it pops up somewhere else, and you have to be mindful of potential unintended consequences of policies that prevent development in one place because where is it going to appear instead? Um, However, there are states that have worked on this. Maryland actually, a lot of the research that I'm referring to came from people in the Ag Econ department in Maryland because, between Washington, D.C. and the city of Baltimore, agricultural land in Maryland was seriously endangered. And that was something that the state really prioritized. Like, we don't want to be a state that loses all of our agriculture. And so they have some policies that they tried, and there are other places in the country where people tried things. So we can learn lessons from other places and from research that people have already done, and try to use that to think about a path forward here in Ohio. So it'll require bringing people together, people who care about nature, people who care about ag, people who care about urban development. But I think what this research shows us, is that those people are not different. That the people who want more urban development are also people who want ag land and who want nature. And so there's really a lot of potential for us to come together in conversations and find a productive path forward. All right. So that's what I had prepared. I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions, if anybody had any.
Yeah, we do. Thanks, Amy. That was
Great.
fantastic.
Mhm.
Really appreciate that. So normally how we do this is have people put questions into the Q&A, and then I'll just ask them to you to keep people from having problems getting on to the to say anything themselves. So if
Sure.
folks have
Yep.
any more questions, feel free to put. We do have a number of them already in there, but feel free to put those questions in there. We've got
Excellent.
tons of time here.
Hmm.
I wanted to start out with maybe a simple one, but I think we tend to not think about it in economics because we do so many surveys and things like this. But how
Mm.
did you carry out the survey? Like what software did you use to collect? How did you find the people that are in there? Just straightforward things like that. Because
Yep.
we take it for granted almost a lot of times because we do so many surveys, but a lot of people
Right.
don't. They're just curious about how we get this
Yeah.
information.
So for the survey of the 10 cities, we used a company called Qualtrics. So we you can use Qualtrics just to do a little survey. I'm going to send out a survey to the department later, just asking a couple questions. But they also have a service where um, they enroll people in panels that will sometimes answer questions. And so you can contract with Qualtrics to provide people with small incentives to take surveys. Um, you always have to be careful. I didn't want to bore people with all the details. You always have to be careful with data quality from that kind of thing. So, we go to conferences and we talk with each other about best practices. How do you design questions to make sure, and how do you analyze the data to weed out responses where people were just hitting the button and not really thinking about it, or it's a bot. There are bots that people program to answer surveys and then get their little incentives. So we're constantly working on best practices to make sure that data quality's high, and therefore the results we're getting are valid. In the other project, the one that was in just two areas, I think we used mail surveys. And
You
that
actually mailed
project
them out.
Yeah, and that project was done very much I think that's right. It was longer ago. But we were very embedded because I was working with sociologists, and they're much better than us economists at engaging with people. And so they had engaged with, so there are other papers written out of that project where they actually were meeting with the stakeholders in the regions and talking with them about their opinions. And so we used them to, and so we were mailing surveys to people, which has its own challenges. How many of you just throw out all the paper mail that comes to your house?
Yeah,
Right?
that's probably a huge
Uh,
proportion, right?
yeah, it's a huge proportion. So that's always a challenge. But yeah, there's different approaches. That the thing with something like Qualtrics is that they tend not to be able to do an internet survey in someplace like Jasper County. That there's just not enough people in a Qualtrics panel in Jasper County to be able to do it. And so there, I have also done projects where we physically put surveys on people's doors and told them if they wanted to take the survey and hang it on their doorknob, we'd come back and pick it up in 3 days. That's another approach that you can take. Um, so there's different strategies for different settings.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And it's super good to know that people are still doing surveys by mail and able to get some responses out of them. That's good to hear that you're able to do that and get a reasonable enough response to get it published. So that's really good.
Yep.
So I want to switch to a similar topic, but slightly different, actually, more about the specifics of the survey itself.
Hmm.
So one question was, how did you determine the annual cost of $100? So where did that kind of $100 payment come from? That's a little bit of a design question, I know, but then
Hmm.
a second question related to that and is, why a tax payment versus other kinds of potential vehicles, right? What was the sort of
Yeah.
philosophy or thought process you guys had behind that?
Right. So let me start with the vehicle first. Why taxes? So the one feature of this kind of research is that you get better, uh, higher validity of the responses and better results if people take it seriously. If people think that there's a chance. And in the beginning of the survey, we say, hi, we're us. We work for this university. We're going to take these results and give them to policymakers. And that might mean that these policies get implemented. And that's true. That is actually true. Um, if there's a tax, people have to pay it. It's not optional. Uh, whereas if you ask people, would you donate? Well, sure. Oh, yeah, I donate, but donates are voluntary. And things that are voluntary, could say, well, I thought I was going to donate, but this month is kind of tight and maybe I won't. And so if the payment that you're talking about doesn't seem like it would be binding, then in economics, people are very suspicious about whether people would think very seriously. Because it's easy to say, oh yeah, sure, save all the things and I'll pay $1 million voluntarily because you won't force me to. Whereas if it's a tax, then you're going to have to. So that's why that. And some people respond negatively, like I hate taxes, I'm never going to pay taxes. And so if somebody says no to every single thing and they put in the comments, I don't believe in taxes, we just drop that observation because they're telling us about their beliefs about taxes. They're not telling us about their preferences about land. And so that's different information. The actual dollar amounts. So the way the survey design process works, sometimes we'll look at previous research to get a sense of what dollar amount is kind of reasonable. Ideally, and so with both of these surveys, some of the choice scenarios have a small payment, some of them have a big payment. You want to have some of the payments small enough that's like, yeah, I could pay $5 for that. And you also want to have some payment levels that are high enough that people are like, oh no, that's just too much. Because that way you're tracing out the whole demand curve. You're seeing like at what point does this just become too much? And no, I don't actually like ag land that much. I'm not going to pay that much money for it. Um, so we do a first round of survey design based on related results from previous research. And then we do a pilot test where we take a small set of people and give them the survey and see how they responded. And then sometimes we adjust the dollar amounts to make sure that some people are sometimes saying yes, and people are also sometimes saying no.
Okay, yeah, I really like that response. Talking about the demand function, how you're trying to trace that out and thinking this through, and the fact that you guys are doing pre-tests. So
Hmm.
you're spending a lot. I mean, to me, what I find really fascinating is how much effort has gone in here to these surveys, right? It's not like you just sort of, oh, let's do this survey next week. You did it. I mean, you spent a lot of time, and I think
Oh,
that
it
gives
takes
high,
months. It
yeah,
takes
and it's high
months. That's
quality
right.
information, right? So you're
Hmm.
getting good stuff
Hmm.
out of it. And
Yep.
yeah, so that's great. Thanks for that. So maybe more, well, I don't want to say more substantive, but maybe more policy related questions because
Yeah.
there are a lot of policy related questions on here. And the big one is you're not going to be surprised relative to
Hmm.
Ohio is that there's a big debate in Ohio about how land is used,
Yeah.
especially as we start thinking of some of the energy projects that are potentially in
Hmm.
play out there in the landscape. So, are you aware of any research, or do you have any sort of thoughts on how your research can be applied in these situations where, and the question was kind of characterized two different ways. One, and I don't want to diminish it because I think it's really interesting the way that two folks sort of thought about it. So Frederick
Hmm.
Reiters talks about sort of the climate lobby, right, and the effect that they have on values, and the fact that there's lots of effort to try to get more land into solar farms, wind farms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Hmm. Hmm.
and seems to go against the idea of farming for food. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that. And then Thalia's related question, any sort of opinions on farmland loss due to urban sprawl versus farmland loss due to wind or solar farms. So
Yeah.
just general thoughts on that. I mean, I don't think your survey addressed these specifically, but potentially has some insights for it.
Well, it does. So, any time we're doing a project, there are costs and benefits to the project. So what are the costs and benefits of a solar farm? Benefit is you get solar power, and that solar power has less pollution than power generated by some other options. Um, uh, and actually at this point is relatively low cost in terms of the cost of generation compared to some other options. So those are the benefits. But what are the costs? So you might just say, well, what are the installation costs? This research allows us to say, well, what is the cost in terms of the lost value that people have for farmland, right? People value farmland for its own intrinsic sake. And in the absence of this kind of research, we don't have a dollar value to put on that. So we're not done with that paper yet, but I think when we are, that will give us, at least a ballpark estimate of what that looks like, that cost. It's like, well, okay, we got some solar power. However, we've also lost some farmland, and so it provides a place at the table. It provides a place in the calculations for that loss. I mean, there's still a process that has to go on, and I it's interesting actually. Just as I said, well, what's a path forward? One path forward is to encourage more infill development so that we get housing in cities rather than sprawling outward. Um, I think the fact that we see a lot more research going on about agrivoltaics is again trying to use technology, trying to do something that reduces the conflict between solar and agriculture. So, can we have both? Certainly, you can have wind and agriculture. Lots of farmers farm around uh, wind turbines. Um, are is it really going to work for solar? I don't know the answer to that, but maybe this research by quantifying the value of having ag land um, can help to provide more motivation for that research to be accelerated.
If I can push a little bit on some of your research results, it seemed like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that but the earlier one, especially the first paper,
Hmm.
uh, it was centered around sort of farmland that's relatively in relative close proximity to a city. I mean, did you guys have a
Yeah.
boundary sort of on that? What was the distance from the city that you were thinking?
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's true. We really it really was about peri-urban ag land. Uh, yeah. So that's true. You could not generalize. That said, maybe I should write I'll do a version of this. Other people have done research about the value of ag land using different methods. And it wasn't limited to ag land around cities. So I think this adds to that, and captures a broader set of values of agricultural land. However, we do have other research that's been done using what we call hedonic analysis. So agricultural land, what does that do to housing prices nearby? And that research is much broader. Um, so I think we
So
could get
yeah,
at that more
I wasn't
broadly.
necessarily
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily going there. I was actually thinking that, what the interesting part to me in Ohio is that because every piece of farmland is pretty close to a city here, right? Given the
It's
distribution of
true.
our cities in this state,
It's true. Yep.
and it's not, you know.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's an interesting question that it could be
Yeah.
applied probably to a lot of acres
In
in
most of
Ohio.
Ohio, you probably could. That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, but you could generate if you wanted to. You could generate sort of a dollar per, like we have,
Hmm.
farmland rents. Barry Ward has really good data on sort of what are farmland rents when land is used as farming, corn,
Yep.
soybeans, other kinds of crops, right?
Hmm.
We have estimates of what the value of land is if it was converted into solar or wind farms. We know that, but now you can sort of actually provide an estimate. This is the value of land if it were just protected around a city to be farmland, and that's probably a sizable number given what you presented, I would guess.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, okay, this is great. So another question from this is from an anonymous person, but I think is an interesting one, and maybe we don't know the answer, and it's something we got to look up. But it has to do with Ohio's revised code and whether park districts can be a vehicle for trying to promote some of this protection. And the concern there is like, maybe park districts can't do that because they can't actually spend funds outside of their own land, right? They can't go out and do some
Mm,
protection. Like they can't buy a conservation easement on a nearby property, even though it might enhance their park, right?
yeah.
It could provide a huge benefit for, say, the water quality or recreation in their park if they could, procure an easement nearby or something like that. But I guess I don't know. Do you know anything about that? Ohio might be so specific on
Yeah,
that
I am not exactly sure in Ohio. So the kinds of things that we do see, who are the agents who do this work? Of course, it's the American Farmland Trust and Nature Conservancy, the big folks. But honestly, a lot of conservation is very local. That's certainly true of nature conservation. Lots of there's a bunch of papers actually documenting this huge sweep of referenda that local communities voted on to tax themselves to raise money to protect local land. Now, that research was done in the context of nature, but there's no reason you couldn't use that same mechanism to, have a community say, "Hey, we value our ag land." And so maybe it's not exactly your local park districts, but it could be your county or municipality or whatever. That definitely a lot at this point, a lot of the new additions to protected land in the United States, it's not federal. It's coming from local areas, local people saying, this is who we are and we want to protect it. And there's no reason that has to be only nature. It could also be ag land.
yeah, and well, yeah, to your point on that, it's like I looked up the numbers in Ohio, not Ohio, but nationally, it's 37 million acres of land are privately protected through easements or other kinds of
Yep.
protected areas. It's a pretty phenomenal number when you think about
It's
it.
huge. It's huge.
Yeah,
And that's where all the growth is. Once upon
yeah,
a time, Teddy Roosevelt and those folks, they locked up all the national park type things. But anything that's new, almost anything that's new, um, some of it's nature conservancy and whatnot, but a lot of it is just local. Yeah.
yeah. So pretty phenomenal.
Hmm.
Okay, so last question, and it relates to the foraging question, and it's from Brian Gwynn. Did you have any information in your surveys about sort of what proportions of that were recreational versus sort of the food aspects?
Um, so the boy that paper is also under in a work in progress. We did there were a lot of questions, especially about fishing, but also about foraging, where we asked people, how much do you go, but then of that, how much are you eating? And it was a mixture. So, and maybe that's part of why people are placing so much value on that because it is kind of fun, right? To go out fishing and to I remember being a kid and there was a forest near my best friend's house and in the summer there was this thicket of raspberries, and we would go and fill buckets and come back scratched to pieces and slightly red from the berry juice. And so, it's fun, but you're also getting food. And so yeah, I think what I've seen from the preliminary data is that is kind of a combination of both. Honestly, there's so little research about this, and when people talk about protecting or restoring lands, it almost never comes up whether there's lots of conversations about, how are we going to manage this land, and is it going to be, um, with these kinds of trees or these kinds of grasses or whatever, and very little conversation about whether we're going to put some things in place that would actually provide food or stock ponds so that people can fish, that kind of thing. So I think. There's just a lot more work to be done on that. And Brian, I will someday, when that work is done, I'll write up a thing about it and let y'all know exactly what we learned.
Well, I love the is it blackberries? I love that because we had the little blackberry patch right behind my house growing up, and
Hmm.
that was my first sort of taste of economics was picking blackberries and selling them. That was quite fun. So,
Who needs a lemonade stand, right?
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. So, well, Amy, this has been fantastic. Really appreciate your taking the time to put that presentation together. Super
Hmm.
interesting and helpful information for people here in Ohio and more broadly across the country. So really appreciate that. If we could all clap, we would. So thank you very much. Um,
Virtual claps.
I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of also point out that the next webinar we have is on January 22nd. It's my own webinar with Douglas Southgate. We'll be talking about our new book, which you can see at the title there. Hopefully I got the right thing shared up there. If not, I apologize. But all of you on here will get invited to that. So thanks again, folks, and we'll sign off now and have a great day. So thanks.
Thanks for signing in, everybody. Bye bye.